have a hunch that you want your brand to stick in the hearts and minds of your audience. Not just get attention, but be unforgettable. But you're frustrated that even your best messaging isn't gaining the traction it should because it's not in sync with how the brain actually processes stories. If that's the case, then you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story. Today, we decode the biology behind belief and behavior so you can build a brand story that truly resonates. You'll learn from Rande Vick, founder of the Vick Agency in Los Angeles and author of the groundbreaking new book, NeuroBranding, the brain-based method to make your brand unforgettable. With a background in sales, marketing, music, and a growing obsession with behavioral psychology, Rand reveals how to apply neuroscience to build stories that bypass resistance, ignite emotion, and embed your brand into long-term memory. So settle in and learn how to wire your brand for influence with the science and art of storytelling. Well, hello there, Rand. Welcome to the show.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. You and I've started following you a few years ago after you and I met at NAMM, North American Music Merchants Association. Zach Phillips was kind enough to invite me out. I did a full-day workshop of which you were a part of. So thank you again for volunteering. It was hard to get volunteers out of that group.
I can't believe it. All those performing musicians and nobody wants to get on stage.
That was so much fun. Then I got to do a little 30-minute segment the day after. And after that, actually, I got some business out of that myself and training on the and, but, therefore, and marketing and that kind of thing. So It's great because I started following you. You were always providing lots of incredible content on LinkedIn in particular. That's where I see you because that's where I am most of the time. And I was super excited for you about a month ago when I saw you introduce your new book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the book?
So I like to say the book came together accidentally because I've been doing branding work for quite a while. I've been in the sales and marketing world for, over 20 years, but there's a lot of things that happened maybe in the last 5 years, probably for everybody post-COVID, and some books that I had been reading, some things that had been just kind of forming in my mind. And I started going down this pathway of, and you're part of this story because it was the storytelling bit. And I know that there's a million storytellers now, but that's probably also changed in the last 5 years. But I read a book that introduced me to the work of Dr. Paul Zak.
I know Paul. He's fantastic.
Yeah, you've had him on the show.
A couple of times,
Okay, cool. I've seen
the love doctor, as I recall, he calls himself, because he's the one that really brought oxytocin to the forefront and that love drug that gets triggered when you tell a good story and develop that emotion.
So reading his books, following his podcast journeys, all those types of things introduced me to a lot of other folks who are in the either psychology or neuroscience world doing similar work. I think he's definitely the most well-known, but there's also folks that are studying the way memories are made and the way, the subconscious works and those types of things that I really started delving into. And so I started changing the way I was doing brand work, and I started taking lots of notes. And eventually I told myself I have enough notes to become some kind of a manifesto. And that ended up becoming NeuroBranding, which is very practical, more of a workbook than an academic work, but based on those scientific studies and research that I've been following.
How the brain works and how you use story and narrative, especially in the branding world. And as you say in your book that I love is people are fighting for attention, but they're not paying attention to memorability. It's one thing to gather that attention, but then how do you keep top of mind? Because I think you have a percentage in there that of all your marketing out there, only 5% of your prospects are ready to buy from you, and the others may well buy from you down the road, providing you remain top of mind. And that's kind of where the NeuroBranding thing came from.
Yeah, these were, this is done from research. I think that Byron Sharp talked about this 95-5 rule, where 95% of your audience that you're trying to reach out to, they're not ready. they're not ready today. They might not be ready tomorrow, and it might not be ready next week or next month, but at some point they're going to be looking for what you offer. And if you're not on the top of their memory, if some other brand comes first, then you're losing out. And so really finding out, that was kind of the driver. That 95-5 rule was really interesting to me. And then finding out, well, yeah, mental salience is a thing. How do we capture that as branding folk? How do we find the things that are going to stick when that 95% is ready to flip the switch?
Yeah. So we'll get to all of that in just a minute, but I want to go a little bit back in your backstory because I think it helps inform who you are and what you're doing today. And you began by talking about that wonderful time in all of our lives of COVID and how it impacted us in many ways. And it impacted you in a fairly severe way with your current employer.
Yeah. Yes. So, I had landed the dream job. The funny thing about this is I have been a guitar player since I was 11. I've been playing Fender guitars since probably 16 or 17 years old. And then eventually only Fender guitars. I play Fender amplifiers, Fender guitars. I was the consummate Fender guy. And at some point they found me. I'm not breaking any rules by saying this. They reached out to me on LinkedIn. They found me on LinkedIn. And there was a position that they were interested in filling, and I fit the bill. And I was very flattered because this is my brand.
What
And
were you doing for them?
I was already invested. Yeah. And so I went to work for them, and, they say, don't meet your heroes. I wouldn't say that. I just said it was a good run I had, and it was a great company, and I loved the instruments. But when COVID hit, there was a knee-jerk reaction across the board. I think every company dealt with like, what's going to happen next. And Fender's was to lay a lot of people off, or to temporarily lay them off. And so I was one of those folks. And and it was a hard hit for me. And I know I don't want to spend too much time talking about this, but this leads into where I'm at today, because it was a hard hit because I considered myself a Fender guy. And being let go, due to COVID, didn't feel right to me. And so I had to, it was a mental struggle, it was an emotional struggle, because I had identified so deeply as a Fender guy, and it made sense for me to have a Fender business card. And so then I started asking myself, well, why am I so connected to this brand? I've worked for lots of great brands. I worked on lots of great brands, but this one in particular, there was something tied deep within. And so that's what started this kind of journey of figuring out, what makes certain brands so tying to our emotions and our memories. And here I am.
Were you working in marketing for Fender?
I was actually doing sales. It was a sales role. Yeah.
And how long did you work there?
I worked there for 18 months.
Yeah.
I came from another company that was, it was one of those things where it's like, man, that was a great company. But I really wanted to work for Fender.
So you had your dream job, your dream brand, and you're not alone, because a lot of people lost their positions during COVID, but that kind of launched you into what you're doing now with the Vick Agency.
Exactly. Yeah. The immediate response was I saw a lot of the folks that I was working with, particularly music stores, who were not prepared to shut the doors, and they weren't ready for the digital experience. And so I immediately saw this opportunity to help people get online. And I was doing it like in the beginning. I mean, branding is the heart, but like these people just I was building web stores. I was doing all kinds of stuff for people to get them kind of to stay in business. And that's how the Vick Agency started. And then it just turned into like, you have a deeper issue than, your website, and started working with a lot of people in that regard.
And is most of your work in the music world, or do you reach out into other industries as well?
Yeah, I started off doing all music stuff. And then, funnily, I don't know how this has worked, but I've worked with 3 law firms, a lot of professional services. I just signed a client last week that's he has a real estate office. And so it's been a little bit of professional services and, kind of the balance of music and professional services. I'm not sure how that worked, but they're fun. I like working on professional services because I am one. So I feel like
Hmm.
there's a little bit more of like I understand what you need to do, how do you need to get to where you want to be. But I do love the music.
So is it fair to say that as you launched Vick Agency, that you were then, like we all do, doing a ton of research and understanding marketing and branding, storytelling? You a big storyteller, and I think probably that comes from your music roots. I'm guessing because every musician I talk with who's in marketing, including myself, we first really grew our chops in music, in learning how to tell a story through an instrument or writing a song or whatever. And it transfers over so easily and powerfully into the marketing communications world, the storytelling world. Did that get you going in your line of work? And then you needed to do a deeper dive into understanding why this worked on our brains?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a songwriter, and I tell a story. When I was growing up, when I was a kid, my parents were listening to the Eagles and Creedence Clearwater Revival and those types of bands, and there's already an element of storytelling in those songs, and I loved trying to figure out what they were saying. And then I had my I tell this story a lot, but I had my best friend was her parents listened to country music, and the first time I heard Kenny Rogers, I was like, "Oh, this is like I heard the Coward of the County, and I almost wept." And I
Hmm.
was like a little child, and so that idea, that storytelling thing it runs deep. And then, I think about every time, Paul Zach tells a story about the $1 Million Baby movie and how he bawled in the movie theater. I did that when I was watching Little House on the Prairie, or when I was
Laura Ingalls.
so yeah, I mean that storytelling thing was deep rooted in me, and now I love listening to songwriters who know how to tell a good story. And yeah, absolutely. Then, coming over to this side of things, I wanted to read everything in the marketing world. I read so many books in 2019, 2020, 2021 about storytelling, and some of those, and like I said, some of those books started to talk about Paul Zach's work and that research, and that's kind of what spun me in the direction I'm at. And I want to say too, like if you've looked at my book, you might have noticed like the way I put strategy together is really very similar based on an ABT idea. It's and but therefore, but the way I've done it is like here's the status quo. It's also the storytelling principles, right? Here's the status quo. Here's what could change, and here's what it looks like when it changed. Those. That's how I build strategy. So it's and it because it sticks, and I learned that from you, and I've learned that from your book.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that I had a bit of an impact on you there, Rand.
Absolutely.
Well, let's dive into neurobranding. So tell us what it's about and how it works.
We could talk about this for a long, long time, but I'll break it down into the three core principles that I think are most important, and that is that brands that focus on things like emotional or immersive experiences, brands that have subconscious tie-ins or associations, and brands that understand how to tell a story in the way of neurocoupling. Erie Hassan, his idea of how your brains sync up when you're hearing a story that somebody's telling, not just any story, because not all stories do that, but those stories that are told right and told well definitely make us think, oh, I've been there. I know what that feels like. I can understand what that person is going through. For example, if I told a story that said there was a woman at a cafe in the early morning drinking her coffee, scrolling through her news feed, and she looked at the time and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to miss the bus." And in a hurry, she stands up, she spills coffee all over her white blouse, and she runs out the door, and she sees the bus, and she says, "Oh great, I can catch the bus." And then she realizes she forgot her bag with her laptop under the cafe table. And so she runs back in to get it and comes out to see the bus leaving. And now we don't know this woman's name, where she works, where she was going. We don't know anything about her, but we've all been late and had that feeling of being like, oh no, I don't want to be late and I'm going to be late. That feeling is that the part of the story that we're going to connect with and neurocouple with. And those are the types of stories that the brands who understand neurobranding tell.
And how do you define neurocoupling?
So it's I mean, I know there's some I know there's a little bit of controversy around this because I've heard some neuroscientists say this is just myth. This doesn't happen. But the continued work of Thierry Hassan from Princeton has shown that this is something that is, I don't know how to explain it. I'm not a scientist to make that clear. I'm science adjacent, but I do study the research quite a bit. And so I know that the neurocoupling is again, when you're hearing a story and you feel the feelings, or you cry in a movie, or you hear a song that leaves you speechless, that's the effect of neurocoupling. That's when your brain is you're producing hormones that make you feel. And so that's how I think of it.
So for an example, maybe, and this just happened to me yesterday, we just got back from a long trip and
Yeah.
I'm, not myself. My brain was, hours different from where we came from. And I was in kind of a hectic mode and I was doing a couple things and not in my somewhat usual calm space. And out of nowhere clicks on Billy Joel, and She's Always a Woman to Me. And just
Mhm.
those opening piano strains just settled me down. Everything just went, ah. And I remember listening to that first verse and go, dang, that's a good song. And then I went on to do something else. And it's a song I hadn't heard in a long time. It just, for whatever reason, has not crossed my path. But it did have this immediate visceral impact on me.
Yeah.
And is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly what it does. So, and you might have heard another song that gave you anxiety or produced some kind of, feeling of fear, because these are all the places in our brain between, the amygdala and the hippocampus that like they produce this feeling of, I know what that's like. And it's either something calming or it's, a lot of brands will use FOMO, and, and it works.
The
So
fear of missing out. Yep.
yeah, yeah. Fear of missing out. The fear aspect is, your whole brain is wired to survive. So anything that's fear based will get our attention.
Oh, yeah, just go doom scroll.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
listen to the news, read the newspaper. It's all fear-based. Everything is fear-based in that respect. So take us to an example. Maybe it's a company you've worked with, Rand, that has used and you've intentionally brought neurocoupling into their marketing and or storytelling.
There's a musical instrument store down here in Southern California where I'm at that I've been working with. And when they came to me, it was because like a lot of people, especially in brick and mortar businesses, they're feeling again, especially since COVID, the online pinch. The people are shopping online. People during COVID learned to get their groceries from ordering on their phone, and no one's leaving their house anymore. So this was a really interesting conundrum for me, because I'm like, well, how do we get people to get off their couch and come in? And so what we did is we started with media, because this is again, people can scroll and find a story from the owner of this company who's been around. This company's been around since the late 70s. They're not new to the game, but this is new for them. So to hear him tell the story of their beginnings, their origin story, and then to get a glimpse of the way he has this passion still after all these years for music. And he tells, and this is not scripted. I didn't tell him what to say. I just sit down and said, this is what we're going for. You know what I mean? Here, tell me your story. And to hear him talk about especially I think coming out of isolation, he's like, it's one thing to play your instrument in your room or in your, music room by yourself. But when you get with three or four other people, he said, there's nothing else like it. So this video, and then we did another video with a customer telling the customer journey about how when he was a kid, he could only afford, beater guitars, and he couldn't really ever play a really nice guitar. And now he's not trying to be a rock star anymore. He's in his late 40s. But now he can afford the really nice guitars. And he talks about finding those guitars at this music store. And so these kinds of these story ideas are part of that strategy. And then the other thing was like really sensory things, like this is memory stuff, right? We want to create memories. So setting the store up in like little jam sections so you can come in and play with your buddies. Having it so that when you immediately walk through the doors, you're getting the scent of leather and wood. And we spot little centers. Like this is creating memories. And I tell people the story all the time too. When your first experience with a dog when you're a child, if that dog is aggressive and tries to bite you, you might have a fear of dogs for the rest of your life. However, if your first impression of the dog is that it's warm and cuddly, you might have a love for dogs for the rest of your life. Now you can overcome those things, but those are immediate subconscious associations that we make. And so when you walk into a store and you smell the way that store smells, that's a sensory memory. And those are the types of things that I'm working with people on building.
I think it's interesting, starting with the music world, which totally makes sense. And here you've got it's a more romantic business, right? Because you got all these instruments and it creates wonderful music and people really connect emotionally with music. But you also said that you work with law firms. So how do you bring the same sort of thinking to a very logic-driven, reason-driven law firm and get themselves out of their own way to become, and create that emotional connection?
Yeah, so I'll tell you the story. One of the stories of the law firms, one that I had maybe the most emotional resonance with myself. It's a law firm, a boutique firm that does family law. So again, you might be seeing, oh, well, that's also emotional. But the way they had presented themselves was, we win cases. Here's case studies. We're experts in our field. We've been doing this for 20 years, those types of things. And so immediately running them through what I call my NeuroBrand method, I understood like this is something that there's no emotional connection to, how many cases you've won. And so we started changing the messaging and the positioning to be more about protecting the things that you love, more about guidance through the hardest time of your life, and telling a different story completely. And we saw the phone ring, we saw their website ping, we saw it change almost within 2 or 3 months, almost that fast. So just being able to tell a different story and a better story, and that's a hard situation. Those are not, those are hard things that want to market. But really knowing getting to know the team, getting to know the staff, getting to know the fact that they really do care about the people they're helping. But the way they're presenting it was like, we're kind of bulldogs and we're going to win for you. And that's a different story.
Well, I've got a resource for you, Rand, and all of you listening out there. On the legal side in storytelling, my friend who lives in North Scottsdale, Doug Passon, is like an internationally recognized sentence mitigation attorney. And what that means, of course, is everybody he deals with is guilty. They are criminals. They are guilty of something, and they've had the book thrown at them, sometimes to just largesse ways, like they did something that maybe they should spend 5 years in jail, but they got 25 years in jail. And he goes in and he appeals to the judge and the jury, the sentencing folks, using their backstory of what got them to where they were, not making excuses for them, but saying there are larger circumstances here besides just the cut and dried, yes, they're guilty, and here's what they did, and that's not good, and they should pay for it. Let's take a look at the backstory of what got them here in the first place. And then we also know then that if we can get them out earlier and train them up, that these are good, productive individuals. And he has used storytelling and this idea, I think, of, as you were talking about with that neurocoupling, so effectively that both the New York Times and I think it was the Atlantic came out and wrote stories saying he was being manipulative. And he goes, well, everyone's manipulative, but I'm not being negatively manipulative. I'm trying to help these people out that, yes, they're guilty and yes, they should serve time, but not to the extent that you've told them. And he got so much focus on his work that even The Simpsons did an episode on sentence mitigation video storytelling based off of his work. And I've had Doug on my show a couple times. Episode, number 182 and episode number 341. And 341 in particular talks about, or he shares how he uses the ABT in storytelling in his sentence mitigation work.
Ooh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so it plays just what you're saying. Finding emotion and bringing it in, but it's fact-based emotion that he's going with. He's not telling lies. He's manipulating in the right ways, in service of these people that, are,
Yeah.
they're not bad people. They just have made some bad decisions.
Yeah. No, that's
So,
great. That's fantastic. And that is the power of, we're talking about storytelling and,
yeah.
the emotional hooks that drive our behavior.
Well, you talked about the 95-5 rule and this neurocoupling. What else in your research that really struck you has made it into your new book?
You'll see the work of Paul Zak in my work. I've quoted him quite a bit. But there's also this comes from some self-work, like I was saying, like being laid off and like having all these internal struggles. Some self-work that I did through the books and through the research of Dr. Thais Gibson, who doesn't do anything. She has nothing to do with branding or marketing. She's literally just helping people get through subconscious blocks. And so that's when I started to she says, your conscious will can never overpower your subconscious will. Right. So there's work that people can do, obviously, to make their subconscious, but your subconscious believes what it believes. It doesn't speak language. It speaks in, abstract. It speaks in pictures, maybe, or colors. So those types of things are fascinating. So when we're talking about logos, right? And yeah, I know logo is not your brand, but when you see the golden arches, it gives you a feeling. When you see the swoosh, you know what it means. Like there are things that the subconscious identifies. And so that part of it, I think, was really fascinating part of my journey, and it made it into the book, as far as how, like, the smell of leather and wood when you walk into a music store. Those types of things, I think, are very fascinating and probably undervalued in our work.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about that subconscious overriding the conscious mind. Many people have talked about that. Who's the gentleman writing or thinking slow and fast?
Yes.
Maybe
yes.
I have that exactly backwards, thinking fast and slow. He just passed away, by the way. Who's the gentleman I'm trying to think of? What's his name? It's a famous guy.
Yeah, of course. I read the book, and I think I even quoted him in mine, but I can't remember his name.
Well, it's because I just brought it up. We can't think of it. It'll come to me here in a second. I just learned that he did an assisted suicide in, I think, Denmark at 91 because he felt like he was used up. He was done. He had done everything he wanted to do and felt like the needless, pitfalls of old aging wasn't for him. But,
wow.
Anyways, they talk about the subconscious and the conscious mind, and it's that elephant rider metaphor that your subconscious is the elephant, and the elephant can pretty much go anywhere it wants, and that conscious, logic-driven brain is the rider. It's this little person sitting on top directing the elephant, and quite often can be very effective in directing the elephant. But boy, once you get tired, fatigued, hangry, whatever, out of your element, all of a sudden that elephant of the subconscious takes over.
Absolutely. Yeah. So learning those types of things. I mean, there are. I don't know if you've seen Dr. Zak's apps. His his immersion app, or his I think it's called.
Oh yeah, we had him on the show talking about that. And by the way, it's Dr. Daniel Kahneman. That's the guy that I couldn't come up with. That's who it is. Yeah, but yes. So go ahead. I had Paul on talking about his immersion app, which is about measuring people's brain waves and how immersive they are. And he first started with movie trailers and trying to determine which were good movie trailers and which weren't, depending on how people were immersed in that short little story.
It's fascinating work. And he even, talking about, we're in the music world, he's talking about how they were able to predict with great accuracy the songs that would become popular on Spotify by using their immersion technology. So those types of predictors are just fascinating, because we have, there's of course outliers, but we all have these things that trigger us in big ways. So finding out what movie trailers are going to work on people, or, out of a series of from the same movie even, or what song is going to connect with the largest audience. Those are fascinating pieces to study and to learn about.
Yeah. Yeah, I had Paul. I just looked it up while you were talking on show number 383. In case you're interested, I'll put it in the show notes talking about that
Absolutely.
immersive thing. So, what else will people get from your book and how they can apply it to really create this neuro branding and become the unforgettable, very memorable brand for their prospects?
I think that, pardon me, I think that if you look through the book, you'll see that it, like I said, is built very workbook-like. So there's exercises at the end of a lot of the chapters that will say, "Hey, this is time. You just talked about this, or you just read about this, or you just learned about this. Let's apply it to your business." And so throughout, I think those types of things will really help people plug in what they're doing and see what's working. There's one fascinating thing, when I was working, for example, the music store, and we can go back to it for just a minute, because one of the things I did is I walked in there and I was like, what's immersive? You know what is filled and creates memories time and time again? You know what some of the best storytellers on the world are? It's Disney, right? It's Disneyland. You can't go to Disneyland. You can stand in a 4-hour wait to get on the Rise of the Resistance Star Wars ride, and you're entertained because they have things the whole way through. It might not be the main thing, but according to Dr. Zach's research, you're still immersed walking through the line because they have, alien languages written on the wall and things beeping and lights flashing, and you're constantly going, "What's this about?" Now, when I walk into any store, I think that, how can we immerse this storefront or this office or whatever it might be to create those types of immersive, subconscious, emotional memories, because they work really well. So I haven't been to Disneyland for a while, but I remember the last time I went, going on that particular ride and waiting in that long line. I couldn't wait the whole time. I was like, it was just, you're anticipating the outcome the whole time. And those types of things. So walking through a store and walking through zones, like here's, maybe the beginner instruments, and then step up into this, and here's the aspirational wall with all the lights shining on it. I was thinking about when I was a kid, and I used to work at a guitar store when I was like too young to officially work, but the man he was kind and let me tune guitars and dust things off, and he paid me a little bit. But one time I walked in, and I was probably 13, and I saw on his counter this guitar. And up until this point, I was playing a Gibson Les Paul that I had bought, saved my allowance and bought. And I walked in and I saw this guitar up on the counter, and it really seemed like every light in the store was shining on this one guitar. And it was a Telecaster Deluxe, a 1972 Telecaster Deluxe by Fender in mocha brown. And I remember thinking, like, that's the best of all worlds. It has a Stratocaster headstock, it's got a Telecaster body, but it's configured, the two pickups and the tones and the volume. I'm nerding out, I know, but they're like, like a Les Paul. It's like the best of all worlds combined. I was 13, and when I was 23, maybe 10 years later, I found one, and now I can afford it, and I bought it. That stuck with me for 10 years. That was the guitar I wanted. I couldn't afford it when I was 13. But
And when you found it, it probably transported you back to that very moment of walking
it
into
did.
that music store and seeing it on the wall and saying, "That's what I want."
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And so that's mental sailing. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. That's digging it into your, your memory, so that when you're ready to buy it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that's what
So
comes up.
much of our work, as you had pointed out too, because of COVID, now is happening online. Vast majority of my work is online training and the podcast, and I don't do as much keynote speaking anymore. I actually don't really care about jumping on airplanes anymore. So it's right here, and I'm like a lot of business people out there. How can you do successful neuro branding, neuro coupling, when the majority of your work is like we're doing right now, looking at each other on Riverside FM online, and we aren't in that immersive one-on-one experience or walking into a storefront?
Yeah, so it is different, and there's product-based categories, there are service-based categories, and then there's kind of e-commerce on its own doing its thing, and it's killing it. I mean, at this point, it's killing it. So the problem that I have one client that I'm working with now is that they're eclipsed by some of the, there's Amazon. There's, like, how do you compete? And so you got to figure, this is part of my process, but also looking at like what can you provide that they can't. And it's not going to be, you're not going to win on price and you're not going to win on speed of delivery. So it's got to be something else. And so what we talk about then is going into these immersive storytelling bits, the pieces that make it personal, because Amazon is not that. The in the delivery process, the added value of what you're going to send along with the product that they bought. There's several key components. It's a little bit tricky because there's some big players in that field, but but it's still growing. E-commerce is still the growing sector. So I think there's a lot of great things that we can do, mostly revolved around storytelling and video and those types of things. But there's also more experiential things that they can be doing too.
Like, do you have some examples?
So I'll give you an example of, this is maybe a silly one, but it's the first thing that came to my head. Sweetwater in my industry, right, in the musical instruments industry, is kind of the king e-commerce. They have a store, but they have one store, and it's in Indiana. So if you're not in Indiana, you're buying the stuff online, and they're the kingpin. They're the ones you go to because they've created an online experience. You can go to almost any product, and you'll see one of their product specialists telling the story in a video of how great this product is. Excuse me. And then if you decide to buy that product, you'll get it delivered. You'll get follow-up calls from that, from your dedicated account specialist. You'll get a bag of candy inside the box along with a catalog of other things you might be interested in because you bought this. It's a very fine-tuned machine. And those are the types of things I think that people can be looking at to win in this industry.
Well, and with AI coming out too, especially in the online, digital world, and it gets to really promoting mediocrity, and it's the people are really relying on it just to write their stuff and whatever. Mark Schaefer, who is a brilliant marketing mind and a guy that I really admire and follow quite a bit, he's got a new book out called Audacious, is really about pitting humans against AI, and his whole premise is, you got to stand out and do silly things. You said, as you set up that story, well, it's kind of silly, but it came top of mind because maybe there's some silliness to it. Yeah. And he had in his newsletter today that I really liked, he goes, the winners are going to be those that can prove that they're human. That means everything's not perfect, that you're seeing the chinks in the armor, the vulnerability, you're having fun, you're being a little bit goofy, you're sending out bags of candy, things that bots can't do. And if you're looking for an immersive experience, those are the things I think that tactile, experience, whether they're on your website or they're receiving something, has a major impact on them.
That's brilliant. I mean, that's really it. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter the industry you're in. We're all in the people business. And so people like talking to people like interacting with people. So again, I haven't done much video, mostly because I have a face for radio. but there is that, there's something connecting about that. When I had the owner of the guitar store tell his story, and I've done this not just with him, other clients would tell that origin story, or the thing that makes you tick story, the thing that keeps you going in this industry when it's so hard right now. Those stories of resiliency and passion, I think, make all the difference. And those are things that we can't get from AI.
Yeah. Well, and I have been venturing into the AI world with our new Story Cycle Genie, and I ran your brand for the Vick Agency and your new book, NeuroBranding, through it. And in just under 5 minutes, it created a report based on our Story Cycle system that says, here is how Rand and his agency brand and his book are showing up in the world, again, based off of our Story Cycle. What did you think of what I sent you? You didn't ask for it. You didn't know it was coming, and it just showed up.
I will be honest. I've been listening to your show, so I was hoping it was going to show up. And
okay.
And it did. And man, it doesn't disappoint. So at some point we're going to have to talk about the world of AI and all of this neurobranding stuff. But this was actually really good. And I think I told you, or maybe I just thought it. I read through this I read through this entire assessment with a giant smile on my face because I was like, how does it know? How does it know this? And there's some really great things in it. So yeah, we can talk about it for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't make any changes. I haven't had time.
Yeah, and this wasn't meant for changes, but it's meant to say here how you're showing up in the world per our again story cycle system, and it's not meant to be the cure all. It's just meant to give you a foundation of the story strategy and elements that you're currently using, and it does really ends up doing three things. It highlights gaps potentially in your communication. If they're not showing up here, it means they're not showing up in your communications, your marketing, your website. It inspires you and shows you different ways to talk about your brand that maybe you hadn't considered before, because we all are so close to our own brands. It's kind of hard to see the forest for the trees, or as they say, we're inside the jar and everyone's reading the label on the outside that we can't see. Well, the brand helps reveal what's on that label to you. And the idea is just to help you then take this as the foundation, doing 80% of the heavy lifting that typically takes months and months and months of research to do, gives it to you in minutes, and then you bring your humanity to it to make it immersive.
Yeah.
So, well, the question for you then, for immersion is about an element of emotion. And the element that I'm always striving for with this particular process of the story cycle genie is that of being enthralled, which means the fascinated attention on something. And isn't that really what every brand wants, is the fascinated attention on itself, but to also be enthralled by the surprising outcomes it delivers to you. Did you feel enthralled in this process? And if so, what were some of the surprises that you got in it?
So yeah, I did feel enthralled. Like I said, it was just, elation, I think was the word that came to my mind. But and there's some good, I think I'm probably my own worst customer when it comes to branding work. So I did see some things in here that I was like, oh, I didn't mention anywhere that I work with musical instruments, industry. That didn't show up on this report because I'm not talking about it on my website. So that was a great gap for me, seeing those kind of, those loose ends. I didn't talk about working with law firms or professional services either. So that was a really big one for me. That was the biggest gap that I think I saw. But that was super helpful because now I know I need to go back and make sure I'm communicating to the right people, obviously. But you know what I really liked? I really liked the unique value proposition.
Would
Uh,
you read that for us?
it says brands that haunt, not just get noticed.
Brands that haunt, not hunt,
Yes,
but
haunt.
haunt your brain, huh?
Yes, yeah, and I think that was fantastic. That's not a word that I would have picked, but what a picture.
Mm-hmm. Let's read the positioning statement, and I'll read it to you, Rand, and you tell me how accurate you think it is currently, and if you'd make any changes on it. So here's what the genie revealed from your website. The Vick Agency stands apart from traditional marketing agencies by focusing on the neuroscience of brand memorability rather than just visibility. The agency emphasizes creating brands that haunt consumers, forming deep neural imprints that trigger emotional responses and make brands psychologically impossible to ignore. Their approach bridges the gap between branding theory and practical brain-based strategies.
That's beautiful.
Is that written anywhere on your website?
Not exactly like that. Now, that's fantastic.
So it has condensed maybe other thoughts and insights throughout your site and boiled it down to that
Yeah,
position statement.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 It's fantastic. So I mean, you're gonna put a lot of people out of work.
No, not necessarily. We might even be bringing a lot more work to a lot more agencies like yours out there, because you and your people don't have to spend the months it takes to pull this stuff together. You can literally do it in minutes. Okay, give it a day or two when you're going to be tweaking some things or here, but then you can activate it immediately. So you can bring this to market within a week versus 6 months down the road.
Yeah, and to be honest, I was kidding when I said that. I actually have already wondered how I'm going to get the link and start using this in the work that I do. So
Yeah.
I think that you're right. It's going to be it's a fantastic tool. And you said 80%. I'd probably say it's probably more than that, but it's great work, and it's
Well,
a what a time saver.
Well, thanks. And, we talked about, I mentioned the three things up top. We talked about the gap, which you identified, that you haven't really come out and focused your communication on the music industry, even though you work in some others, but that's your main go-to, it sounds like.
Yeah.
You were inspired by the unique value proposition and even how the position statement together came together. But then there's also the third element of confirming some things you're already doing, validating the way you're already communicating about your brand. So you smile and you go, yeah, that's right. I nailed that right there. Can you point to a couple of those validation triggers in the output that it gave you?
There is, I mean, I think overall, that's the feeling that it was like, okay, like that's how I'm showing up, and those are the things I want to be known for. So that was already just, I think that was across the whole document. And one of the things that I give you one thing I liked and one thing that I'm like, is that really the one thing I liked is you break up the the thing here says the heroes in your brand story or your primary audiences, and you gave me three different audiences and ways to communicate, and I thought that was fantastic.
And those are the brand transformation seekers, audience
Yes,
number two, strategic growth leaders, and audience number three, brand revitalization executives.
exactly. Yeah, that was fantastic work. That was something that I haven't seen, or to be honest, that's something that I haven't put together before. So that was really cool. That was really cool to see. And the other thing that I was like, am I really a sage?
Mm-hmm.
Am I really? I understand exactly how that comes across because you, especially probably as the neurobranding guy, this becomes like you're the expert or whatever. But the funny thing about that is that, like, I'm a huge Star Wars nerd too. So I was like, yeah, I could be Obi-Wan.
Well, and the thing about this too is, again, I just ran it, not totally being
Of
intimate with
course.
your brand and so forth. It just gave you its initial output. But what you would then do, Rand, as the brander, say, okay, I like the sage, but I don't know if it's my primary archetype. I'd like to move that to a secondary. Maybe I want to move magician up. Do that for me. And then I would like you to rethink sage. I like some of the personalities, but now make it more associated with music and or Star Wars. And it will go in and it will reframe that personality of Sage and explain to you why it did and how it relates to your brand. So this is not a static document. It is the foundation for you then to go in and tell the genie, its wishes are your commands, basically, and you can command it to change and tweak and do anything you want. And then in the end, you will have the overall foundational brand story strategy and the story elements exactly how you want them.
Phenomenal. It's great work.
And that's the game plan. And you know what, Rand, just sign up for our launch. Like everybody else, just go to businessofstory.com/story cycle dash genie, or I'll put you in there and we'll send that out. And, we've got some bonuses, which include free access to the ABTs of Storytelling micro training course, which is a $125 value. You get a digital copy of the Narrative Gem for Business, which is your ABT guide to craft them, and also give you a digital copy of my brand Bewitchery book that is all about the story cycle system. And finally, you are going to get like 20 or 75% off the launch of the Genie, which will be
Oh,
here. I mean, anytime. We are on the last 2% of getting it dialed in. So, yeah, check it out at businessofstory.com/story cycle dash genie.
all right. Yes, I
Yeah.
can't wait for it to come out.
Well, and now you have offering a giveaway for our listeners today about your new book. What is that?
I do. I put together, so there's a workbook that goes hand in hand with it. It's called the Quick Start Guide, NeuroBranding, the Quick Start Guide. And so that'll walk you through, and it actually is broken into three quadrants. So if you are a product-based business, a service-based business, or an e-commerce brand, there are specific exercises in that, going through the three principles that we talked about today.
Yeah. And where do people find that?
Well, I'll send it to you. You can put it in the show notes.
Yep.
It's an exclusive for your listeners. So however you want to
Okay.
distribute it, we'll
Yeah,
make it happen.
email me that link and I'll definitely put it in the show notes and promote it out there when we promote your show. I know the last thing I was going to mention in reading on some of the promotion for your book, you also talk about the fantastic positioning work of April Dunford.
Yes.
So she's had a big impact. Do you know, Rand, that she was on our show last week? So you are the follow-up show to April's appearance.
I didn't know that. I feel so special now. Yeah, her work is incredible. She's a brilliant thinker. It's great.
She really is. And when it comes down to brand positioning, especially for tech brands in the B2B world, she is marvelous. It was a really fun episode.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that now too.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rand. I appreciate your time today. I hope to see you at NAMM next year, the National Association of Music Merchandisers. I got to reach out to Zach and get back out there and do some more story training.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thanks for being here, dude.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for listening and sharing this episode with anyone you know who would benefit by dialing in their brand story, not only making it attention-grabbing, but unforgettable. NeuroBranding is really an amazing new science. And if we can help you grow your brand, then you know where the place to go is? It's businessofstory.com/story-cycle-genie. That's right. We are about to launch our brand new AI-driven story cycle genie so that you can craft your amazing, unforgettable brand story strategy in minutes, not months, at a fraction of the cost of the old traditional way of branding and with proven results. So you will hit the mark precisely where you want it and where it needs to be. So check it out, businessofstory.com/story-cycle-genie. You're going to love it. Join me next week when I will have another amazing story artist right here for you like Rande Vick. And until then, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it not only epic, make it unforgettable. Thanks so much for listening.